I shouldn't be telling you this, not to anyone, but there's a night that haunts me. One that started like any other shift. Quiet, almost too quiet, in the ER at St. Mercy's. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, steady and unchanging, while the smell of antiseptic clung to my clothes like a second skin. At first, it was just the usual. Monitors beeping, the shuffle of my own footsteps against the linoleum floor, the distant murmur of another nurse talking to a patient who didn't want to be there. Then I heard it. Not a sound exactly. Not at first. Just a movement in the empty hallway. A shuffle of shoes that weren't mine. Echoing off walls that should have been deserted. My heart jumped, adrenaline kicking in. But when I turned, there was nothing. Just the faint, sickly scent of something metallic in the air. And the monitor's steady beeping, now sounding almost like a countdown. I thought I was imagining it. I wanted to think I was imagining it. But then the whisper started, soft, deliberate, right by my ear, saying my name. I spun around, and still, the hallway was empty. My stomach dropped as I realized the patient I'd been checking on earlier, the one in room 7, was gone, vanished. Their chart still on the counter, vital signs frozen in time, but no one inside. I checked the security cameras. Nothing. Not a flicker, not a shadow. It was like they had never existed. And yet, I can't shake the sound of those footsteps or the faint whispering, even now, years later. I'm warning you. What I'm about to tell you in the next few minutes, the 10 stories that follow, are worse than anything you've imagined. Some of them will make your skin crawl. Some will make you question whether what you think is real really is. And some, well, I'm not sure anyone survives hearing them without looking over their shoulder forever. These are the 10 worst experiences I've seen, or wish I hadn't. And it starts tonight with the things that hide just beyond the edge of the hallways you think are empty. Story 1. The Vanishing Patient. It started as a routine call. A suspected overdose in a dimly lit alley on the outskirts of town. My partner, Jake, and I arrived to find a young man slumped against a dumpster, barely conscious, skin pale and clammy. "We've got you, buddy," I said, trying to keep my voice calm as we lifted him onto the stretcher. He murmured something incoherent, eyes half closed, and I caught the faint scent of antiseptic mixed with something wrong. The ride to the hospital should have been straightforward. The city was quiet that night, streets slick with rain, reflections of neon signs dancing on wet asphalt. The siren cut through the darkness intermittently, a jagged reminder that time mattered. Jake drove while I monitored vitals, talking to the patient to keep him conscious. "Hang on," You're going to be fine, I whispered. Just a few more minutes. Minutes passed, and then nothing. 1 second, he was there, the pressure of his body against the stretcher firm beneath my hands. The next, a cold emptiness. I glanced down. The straps were fastened. The stretcher was secured. But the patient, he was gone. Jake, he's not here, I stammered, voice rising, panic clawing at my chest. What do you mean he's not here? Jake's eyes widened as he swerved slightly, heart pounding. I don't know. I swear he was just... I couldn't find the words. The ambulance felt impossibly small. The siren now a distant wail. I checked the floor, the walls, the compartments. Nothing. Not a drop of blood. Not a single trace. Not everything in the back of an ambulance is human, I muttered under my breath. A warning I'd heard once from an old EMT, dismissed as superstition. Now, it made horrifying sense. We arrived at the ER, doors sliding open with a sterile hiss. The lights were flickering, casting long shadows over the linoleum. Jake and I exchanged a look neither of us wanted to acknowledge. Whatever, or whoever, had vanished into thin air wasn't finished yet. And I knew, with a cold certainty, that the next horror was waiting just beyond those swinging doors. Across multiple hospitals, I'd hear whispers later of similar disappearances. Patients gone without a trace, charts frozen in time, and staff left questioning their own sanity. It was a pattern, a warning. Some things move where we cannot see, and they leave nothing behind but fear. Story 2. The ICU. Whisperer. The ICU at St. Mercy's had a silence that pressed against your eardrums, even at night. Machines hummed, monitors beeped, and every so often, a ventilator would sigh like it was alive. I was making my rounds, coffee in hand. The machine had started spitting out lukewarm sludge that night, as if it were judging me for showing up at all. Even the coffee machine seemed to judge me that night. I reached room 12, where Mr. Holloway had been in a coma for weeks after a car accident. He looked peaceful, pale, and still under the fluorescent lights. But as I leaned over to check his vitals, I heard it. A whisper, faint and trembling, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. Don't leave, I froze. My skin prickled. ICU rooms are supposed to be empty at night, just machines and silence. Hello? I asked, heart hammering. Nothing. I chalked it up to exhaustion, but as I moved down the hall, more whispers joined in, soft and urgent, almost conversational. By the third patient, I realized the pattern. The whispers weren't random. They were phrases repeated by patients in comas, low murmurs carried through ventilators, IV lines, even the monitors. Don't look. Not yet. Stay with us. Some patients repeated them aloud, their voices eerie in the still night. Others panicked violently, thrashing against restraints or screaming nonsensical warnings. I started keeping a log, just in case, but the entries seemed futile. There was no logic to the timing or the words. Yet, it was almost as if they was communicating with something else. Something in the walls, the vents, the spaces between beats of the heart monitor. I joked quietly to myself that even the coffee machine might know more than I did. But the laughter was hollow, swallowed instantly by the beeping of the machines. By 3 a.m., I was exhausted, but compelled to finish my rounds. Every step echoed like a warning. The air felt thick, and shadows pooled unnaturally beneath the beds. I kept thinking about the first whispers I'd heard that night. How insistent they were, how alive, and how desperate. When morning arrived, the ICU was calm again. Patients silent once more, monitors rhythmically ticking. But I knew it wouldn't last. That quiet? It was just the calm before the next wave. And as I walked out toward the elevator, the thought hit me. If the ICU could harbor this, the other wings of the hospital, quiet, abandoned overnight, might hold horrors far worse, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul. Story 3. The Elevator. I was finishing a late-night janitorial shift, floors polished, trash bins emptied, when the elevator dinged. I pressed the button for the basement storage. Routine, nothing unusual. But the doors closed, and the familiar hum of the motor sounded wrong. Lower, slower, as if the elevator itself was struggling against some invisible force. The numbers above the doors flickered. 3, 2, 3, 2. Again and again. I pressed the button for the basement. Nothing. The elevator shuddered, lights strobing, casting the metallic walls in a grotesque blur. Shadows pooled in corners that shouldn't exist. Dark shapes that twitched just at the edge of my vision. A voice, low, almost coaxing, whispered behind me. I spun around. No one there. Just my reflection, distorted, elongated, moving slightly out of sync with me. My heartbeat thundered as I pounded the emergency button, praying for a response that never came. Minutes or hours passed. Every time the door slid open, I glimpsed a floor that wasn't mine. Empty hallways, walls smeared with shadow, stairwells stretching impossibly. The fluorescent lights flickered in a rhythm that matched my panic. and for a moment, I thought the elevator itself was alive, testing me, measuring my fear. I tried to speak aloud, tried to anchor myself in reality. It's just a malfunction, just a glitch. But the elevator laughed in silence, if that's even the word. The hum warped into a low growl, vibrating through my bones. My reflection winked at me once, something I had never done. When the elevator finally shuddered to a stop and the doors opened, I stumbled out. The hallway was empty, perfectly normal. Nothing amiss, nothing broken. But I knew, I wasn't entirely myself anymore. A part of me had stayed behind in that looping metallic purgatory, trapped between floors where the laws of reality bent like wet wax. Staff whispers followed me even after I left the elevator. Accidents that aren't really accidents, they said. Voices hushed in the break room. Papers went missing. Floors closed off for no reason. Patients found in places they shouldn't be. Everyone knew something lurked in the shafts and lifts of the hospital. Something patient, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul. And that something, it was waiting for me, or anyone else who stepped inside, eyes wide, alone. Story 4. The patient who knew too much. The call came just after midnight. A man collapsed in his apartment. No obvious injuries. Vitals erratic. Jake and I arrived to find him pale, shaking, eyes wide, and unblinking. You're going to die tonight, he said, before we even touched the stretcher. I froze. Sir, what do you mean? I asked, kneeling beside him. Not just me, he whispered, voice trembling. You, the nurse, the driver, others, all of you. Jake and I exchanged a glance. I felt the familiar weight of dread settle in my chest. You're delirious, I said. Just hold still. We'll get you to the hospital. He shook his head violently, as if to dislodge some invisible thought. I've seen it. The pattern. They move through the hospital. They know. And tonight, they're coming. I tried to calm him, tried to reason with what I assumed was fevered paranoia. But the more he spoke, the more precise his predictions became. Names of staff, times, even rooms where accidents would happen. Details I had no way of knowing. The words clawed at my sense of reality. On the ride, he kept murmuring, and I couldn't stop myself from listening. Each phrase was a puzzle, a warning, a riddle. The first is on the 5th floor. Look for the light that doesn't flicker. Then, the doors that never close. You'll see. By the time we arrived, I felt a strange vertigo, as if the world had shifted slightly while we drove. Jake glanced at me nervously. What the hell was that? He whispered. I don't know, I admitted. But I don't think he's just sick. He knows something we shouldn't. I wheeled him into the ER, vitals monitored, staff questioning. Yet the man seemed entirely lucid, aware, and impossibly prescient. Even as we placed him in a bed, a pattern formed in my mind, connecting him to previous calls, previous patients who had whispered truths no one could know. It was almost like there was a network, patients who knew things they shouldn't. Could this be a glimpse into something beyond our world? Or were our minds simply cracking under the weight of too many nights, too many strange encounters in empty corridors and flickering lights? I stepped back into the hallway, silent and sterile, the fluorescent hum pressing down. Beyond these walls, the hospital waited, shadows pooling in the corners, secrets moving between rooms. And I knew the next story, the next horror, would find me there among the corridors at night. Story 5. Night Shift Shadows. Night shifts were always quiet, but that night the silence felt deliberate. I was making my rounds, checking IVs and monitors, when I noticed movement in the corner of my eye. A figure, tall and thin, gliding along the corridor. I spun around. Nothing. Just the fluorescent lights flickering weakly above. I shook my head, telling myself I was tired, imagining things. But then, another shadow appeared, reflecting across the walls, stretching unnaturally, vanishing whenever I blinked. My heartbeat thumped in my ears, and I started counting. 1, 2, 3. Each step echoing against linoleum floors that should have been empty. A sudden beep from a cardiac monitor made me jump. I turned, expecting a patient, but the room was empty. The shadows weren't confined to one area. They moved fluidly, shifting along walls, pooling at doorways, almost sentient. I muttered under my breath, "I've seen shadows that moved with a mind of their own." And my voice caught when I realized they were still here, lingering in the corners of my vision, watching. I tried to rationalize. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe the dim lights were playing tricks. But my instincts screamed otherwise. Every time I moved forward, a shadow mirrored me, always just at the edge of perception. Sometimes in places where a human couldn't possibly be. A loud crash echoed from the supply room, and I bolted toward it. The door was closed. When I opened it, the room was empty, instruments neatly in place, but the cold draft brushing my neck, the sensation of being followed, made my stomach knot. I could feel their attention, silent but heavy, pressing against me as I moved through the hallways. By the time I reached the nurse's station, I was questioning my own sanity. Every corner held potential movement, every doorway a threat. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see them. Figures with no faces, limbs elongated or distorted, drifting silently. And yet, they weren't gone. Not really. Even now, I can remember the feeling, the way the shadows watched and followed, and I know they're still there, waiting for the next shift, the next person who dares wander the empty halls, the corridors that seemed endless and benign by day became arenas of tension at night. And as the shadows stretched and crept, I realized that the horrors didn't stay confined to quiet hallways. They followed the chaos into trauma rooms where life and death collided, escalating what was already terrifying into something far worse. Story 6. The Code That Never Ends. The call came in fast. A code blew on the fourth floor. I sprinted alongside Jake, adrenaline surging. The hallway lights flickered as we ran, casting jagged shadows across the walls. When we reached room 417, the scene was chaos. Monitors flatlined, alarms blaring, the patient blue and unresponsive. "Let's get him back," Jake yelled, hands moving with practiced urgency. I grabbed the defibrillator paddles, my fingers slick with sweat. We shocked, we ventilated, we administered drugs, but the vitals refused to stabilize. Each time the heart rate returned, it plunged again, like a cruel rhythm orchestrated just to torment us. The equipment began acting strangely. Monitors flickered numbers that made no sense. IV lines pulsed on their own, tubing twisting like serpents. The suction machines screamed unexpectedly, echoing off the walls in a harsh, metallic cry. I glanced up, and for a moment, the shadows in the corner seemed to stretch, lean toward the bed. Something in that room wasn't human, and it knew I was watching. "Keep going! Don't stop!" I shouted, though my voice quivered. The patient's lips moved, murmuring words I couldn't understand, while the ventilator groaned, each breath a low, tortured echo. My heart hammered, my skin crawling. It felt like eyes were on me, dozens of them, invisible but tangible, pressing through the sterile air. Minutes, or was it hours, blurred together. My arms ached, legs trembled, but the room wouldn't relent. Each life-saving attempt was met with the same impossible defiance, as if the patient were a puppet for something else, something that thrived on fear and despair. Finally, I stepped back, hands shaking, and the room fell silent for a brief, suffocating moment. Jake whispered, voice tight, "We need to step out. This isn't right." I stumbled into the break room, heart still racing, coffee untouched on the counter, the fluorescent lights buzzing in the corners of my vision. I sank into a chair, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Every shadow seemed thicker, every noise sharper. My mind raced with questions. Was it just a string of unlucky failures? Or had I truly glimpsed something beyond comprehension? And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that the horror from that room wasn't confined to room 417. It lingered with me, following me down the hallway, seeping into the hospital's corners, and waiting for the next shift, the next patient, the next witness. Even in the break room, the sense of being watched never fully left, and I knew it would find me again soon. Story 7. The Break Room Horror. The break room was supposed to be a refuge, a place for coffee, instant noodles, and brief moments of sanity during the night shift. But that night, it became something else entirely. I was leaning against the counter, staring at the vending machine, when it rattled violently on its own. A bag of chips tumbled out, landing perfectly on the floor, as if tossed by an invisible hand. I muttered, "I've never wanted instant noodles to betray me so badly," half laughing to cover the unease twisting in my stomach. Jake poured himself coffee, only for the machine to spurt black sludge over the counter. The aroma of burnt plastic mixed with the bitter coffee made us both gag. "Well," he said, trying to sound casual, "at least it's consistent." But the small anomalies didn't stop there. The microwave beeped, cycling through its timer despite being empty. The fridge hummed, lights flickering inside, shadows moving behind the glass, even though nothing was there. Every object seemed aware, reacting to us with a slow, deliberate malice. I rubbed my eyes, convinced exhaustion was turning the mundane into the sinister. And yet, when we glanced at the clock, time itself seemed stretched, minutes dragging like hours. Staff trickled in, drawn by the odd noises, and each one had a story. Lockers opening on their own, coffee cups sliding across the counter, phones ringing when nobody had called. No one laughed anymore. Humor dissolved into an unspoken fear. The anomalies weren't isolated. They were connected. Threads in a web stretching through the hospital. Every strange event in the break room mirrored something we'd seen elsewhere. A shadow flickering in a hallway, a patient disappearing, a monitor beeping on its own. And suddenly, the room felt too small. The vending machine rattled again, louder this time, echoing in the silent break room like a drumbeat. We all froze, knowing instinctively that what started here, these minor disturbances, was only a hint of the horrors waiting just beyond the walls, in the corridors, the wards, the wings, where patients and staff alike were being tested by something beyond our understanding. I wanted to leave, but the door felt farther away than it should. The hospital itself seemed aware of us, stretching, bending reality in small, unnerving ways. The break room was just the beginning, a microcosm of the terror spreading through the building. And as we stepped back into the hallways, I realized it wasn't only the night shift experiencing this. The hospital, every wing, every floor, was alive with something, watching, waiting, and it wasn't done. Story 8. The Phantom Trauma Patient. It was a chaotic night in trauma. Alarms blaring, gurneys rattling, the smell of antiseptic and blood thick in the air. We got a call. A patient had been rushed in from a car crash, severely injured, barely clinging to life. Jake and I met them at the entrance. A young man with a head wound, vitals erratic, groaning through the pain. "Let's move," I shouted. But the moment we wheeled him into trauma, something felt off. Monitors registered his pulse, but it was irregular in a way that didn't make sense. The room felt colder, the air heavier, like every breath drew invisible hands closer. I checked his IV lines, started fluids, called for imaging. "Hang in there," I murmured. "We've got you." But when I turned to grab the chart, the bed was empty. I blinked. The monitor still beeped, showing vitals that should have corresponded to him. But the stretcher held only sheets, crumpled and empty. "Jake." "He's gone," I whispered, my voice shaking. He was gone, vanished. No doors open, no hidden exits, nothing on the cameras. Just gone. The staff froze, disbelief spreading like wildfire. A few tried to convince themselves it was hallucination, exhaustion playing tricks. But deep down, none of us could explain it. Questions spiraled. Did we imagine it? Did someone or something take him? Was it a supernatural occurrence? Or part of something larger, something secretive? Rumors of government involvement in unexplained hospital incidents flashed in my mind. Every staff member questioned their actions, their competence, their sanity. Later, whispers circulated, a pattern of phantom trauma patients across the city, disappearing before tests, before treatment, leaving nothing behind but empty beds and unanswered questions. No one knew why, and everyone was afraid to ask. Have you ever seen someone vanish into thin air in a hospital? Comment if you have, because it feels unreal, impossible. And yet, it happened that night, to all of us. The incident left a mark on our minds, our nerves, and the hospital itself. Trauma rooms became zones of caution and dread. And as I stepped out into the dimly lit hallways, the weight of cumulative fear pressed down. The next stories, the ones I'll share, are the culmination, personal experiences, lingering trauma, and encounters that left me questioning what is real, what isn't, and what follows you long after the night shift ends. Story 9. The Blood That Didn't Exist. I shouldn't have been in room 304 alone. The call was minor, a fainting patient with nothing serious. But when I arrived, the room was empty, the bed made, monitor silent, and yet there it was, a trail of blood, vivid and glistening, streaking across the floor toward the sink. I froze. The smell hit first, a metallic tang that made my stomach twist. I knelt, careful not to touch it, just to study the texture. It was real, warm to the touch, sticky and thick. But there was no patient, no source. My gloves felt inadequate. My stomach knotted as I realized the streaks continued up the wall, droplets forming eerie patterns in the harsh fluorescent light. I called the charge nurse, voice tight. Room 304. There's blood here, but no one's here. Are you joking? She replied, her voice a mixture of fatigue and disbelief. We'll send someone to check. But when the team arrived, the room was clean, floors wiped, walls spotless. No trace remained of what I had seen, and yet I could still smell the iron tang faintly, as if it had seeped into the walls. It wasn't the first time. Similar occurrences had been reported. Blood trails appearing in empty rooms, walls splattered when no patient had been admitted, charts showing vital signs that didn't belong to anyone. Each time, hospital administration offered explanations: procedural errors, hallucinations, cleaning mistakes. But the reports never accounted for the unmistakable warmth, the texture, the smell that lingered long after the visuals had vanished. I started to avoid certain rooms, to glance nervously at hallways before entering. My mind played tricks, yes, but I knew what I had seen. The blood was real, the fear was real, and it didn't stop. The hospital never explains it, but it never stops. Trails appear, vanish, reappear elsewhere, leaving staff questioning sanity, safety, and the nature of what lurks just beyond sight. Every streak, every smear feels like a warning, a reminder that even in sterile walls, even under bright lights, the building itself harbors secrets no one can fully comprehend. I wiped my hands on a clean towel, trying to shake the unease. My reflection in the window was pale, eyes wide, and I knew the final story, the one that pushed everything I'd seen to its breaking point, was waiting for me, the one that would leave me and anyone who hears it questioning if the hospital had always been haunted. or if we had simply been too blind to notice until it was far too late. Story 10. The Last Shift. It was my final shift before a short break, but something in the hospital that night felt wrong. The air was thick, almost tangible, carrying echoes of every terror I'd witnessed before. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls, flickering lights hummed like warning sirens, and somewhere in the distance, monitors beeped in rhythms that didn't belong. As I moved through the corridors, memories of previous nights collided with the present. The vanishing patient, the ICU whispers, the looping elevator, the phantom trauma patient, the blood that didn't exist. They were all here, converging into one impossible night. I heard footsteps behind me, quick and deliberate. I spun. Nothing. Yet the sensation of being watched was suffocating. In the break room, the vending machine rattled violently, spilling snacks across the floor. Coffee machines hissed, smoke curling into the sterile air. Even the noodles betray me, I muttered under my breath, a weak attempt at humor. But the laughter died as I glimpsed Mr. Holloway's pale face in the reflection of the microwave, whispering the same words he had in the ICU. Don't leave. Not yet. Rushing to trauma, I found empty gurneys and blood trails leading nowhere. The phantom patient's eyes seemed to follow me from the corner of every room, while alarms sounded in random intervals, echoing through empty hallways like desperate warnings. The elevator doors opened on floors that shouldn't exist, shadows pooling like ink along the walls. I realized then that it wasn't isolated events. The hospital itself had become a single organism, feeding on fear, bending reality to trap those inside. Every anomaly, every whisper, every disappearance was a thread in a web designed to keep me and anyone on shift, aware, terrified, and helpless. By the time I reached the ER, I was exhausted, trembling. Vitals fluctuated impossibly. Shadows lingered behind every corner, and the faint metallic scent of blood hung in the air. I wanted to leave, to escape, but the building had other plans. And as I looked into the long hallway, I understood the truth. This cycle never truly ends. Patients vanish, shadows move, blood appears, whispers echo. They're all part of the same story, the same night, repeating with subtle variations, waiting for the next witness. If you think this ends here, think again. Some things follow you home. Some things linger long after the lights go out, behind the sterile walls, in corners you never thought to check. And now, as I hear the faintest shuffle behind me, I wonder if I'm beginning it all over again. Another shift, another round, trapped in a hospital that never sleeps, never releases its own, and never forgets. By now, if you've made it this far, you've heard the worst of what I've seen, or at least the worst I'm willing to share. And if you think it ends here, you're wrong. These stories never really end. Every hallway, every room, every quiet night shift holds another tale, another shadow, another whisper waiting for the next set of eyes. I want you to think back. The vanishing patient, the ICU whispers, the looping elevator, the phantom trauma, the blood that didn't exist. Did you notice the patterns? Did you catch the details that didn't quite make sense? Maybe you have your own experiences, moments in hospitals, clinics, or even ambulances when something felt off. Share them. Comment below. Tell your story. Someone out there has seen it too, and maybe, together, we can map the full scope of what lurks behind the sterile walls. Some viewers have already left hints in the comments of previous videos. Little threads that might point to secrets, patterns, or ongoing incidents I haven't yet documented. Look carefully. Sometimes the stories are hidden in plain sight, in shadows between lines of text, waiting for someone willing to notice. I wish I could tell you it's over, but I can't. The hospital doesn't release its hold that easily. The corridors are still alive. The shadows still watch. And somewhere, just out of reach, there's always another story, another horror, waiting for someone awake enough to see it. Check your local ER at night. Walk past the empty halls. Listen for the soft beeps of monitors, the shuffle of footsteps, whispers in rooms you thought were empty. You might see something you can't unsee. And if you do, remember this. I warned you. The lights flicker once more. A monitor hums in the distance. And somewhere, just out of view, a whisper says your name.